Howdy folks, Justin here, and welcome to a special episode of From Loser to Legend, the series I quit making like a year and a half ago. Today we're going to talk about 11 tips that I have for Arena, kind of a recap of some of the things we saw in action when I was playing Arena this week for Arena Week, and just some general lessons that I've picked up from playing Arena a ton for the last couple of years. I will say that this is all informed by the Houses of Morrowind meta, which is significantly different than previous advice I've given for Arena. Last time I talked about this like this was before April, so it's been a while. But I think that with some of these tips at your disposal and some practice, you can hit 7 runs, max wins pretty reliably, honestly, like I do. I'm pretty awesome. Welcome to From Loser to Legend Arena Edition. So, like I said, there are 11 of these. We're going to use the same incredibly high-tech MS Paint created prompts that I used to in this series. And we're going to start with Arena tip number 1, which makes sense. Take 2-drops. This one's huge. You want at least 6 2-drops. 2-3 is the best stat line for a 2-drop because it has the potential of trading with an opponent's 2-2 or 1-2 or whatever they got going on. It survives the most. 3-2 is the next best. 2-2 is the last least good. But special shout out to 1-2 lethal creatures. There are 2 of these. Ald Velothi Assassin and Fighters Guild Recruit. These are both amazing. And there are certain abilities that are going to push you over the top, which are addressed by other tips. Wardcrafter, for instance, Windkeep Spellsword are both amazing. But all other things being equal, 2-3 is the stat line you want to go for. You can ignore some keywords like Breakthrough on a Kagudi or stuff like that. Doesn't really matter. You want a 2-3. This is why the 2-drop neutral God Dwemer card is a pretty reasonable pick, especially early in the draft when you want to max out your 2-drops. There are 30 cards in your deck. If you have at least 6, you, on mulliganing, have a pretty reasonable chance of having at least 1. And if you don't do anything the first 2 turns of the game, you're going to have a bad time. So, that's my first Arena tip. I think it's pretty reasonable. Next tip, items are your friends. Houses of Morrowind really increased the power level of items. I have a small tier list here, but all items need to be looked at seriously. And special shout out to Heirloom Greatsword for being one of the strongest bomb cards you can get in Arena, turning every creature you have into a threat. But Gavel of the Ordinator on turn 2 or 3 will decide a lot of your Arena games. That's just how Arena is right now. It's one of the reasons you want to play classes that have access to it. It is an incredibly powerful card, and it will leave a threat for you on the board, trade well, trade favorably. It's just take Gavel of the Ordinator. But don't count it as one of your 2-drops, because it's not. Second in my little tier list here of Morrowind items is Redoran Battlespear. This is 3 magicka for a 1-3 that gives a creature Rally 1 in addition to the 1-3 item. This is huge too. The added toughness has a similar effect to the Gavel's temporary immunity from damage. This is going to allow you to trade much more successfully. And in addition, Rally is a very powerful keyword, especially in Arena, where silence effects are at a minimum, removal is a lot worse. So yeah, you definitely... I'm sorry, I'm getting a bunch of text messages. You definitely want to pick up as many Redoran Battlespears as is reasonable and responsible, but again, prioritize having creatures to put them on. But Redoran Battlespear on turn 3 is going to also decide games. Daedric Crescent deserves a shout out too. This looks relatively unassuming, but turning every creature you control into a Slay +1/+1 is kind of a big deal. In addition to the +2/+2 on a creature you already have on the board is also huge. Now, all of these items are taking into consideration that you're paying attention to Arena Tip 1 and you have a healthy number of 2-drops that you can then equip these items onto. But if you do that, picking these guys are going to win you games. It's going to let you win the field lane, which is hugely important too, although it's not a tip. Just pay attention to your items. Anything that screws up combat math for your opponent is great. And that's a recurring theme you're going to see in these tips. Let's move on to Arena tip number 3. The hierarchy of card advantage, as I see it, goes something like this. The most important thing you can do to generate card advantage in Arena is have big butts on your creatures. This can mean a couple different things. It can mean creatures like Hive Defender, which is very likely to get a 2-for-1, meaning 1 Hive Defender trades for 2 of your opponent's resources. And stuff like Ward Crafter and Ward in general, which is also likely to generate card advantage for you by necessitating multiple cards from your opponent to answer. Second up is card draw creatures. There are only a few of these, and they come with some caveats. But the prime examples of great cards here are things like Ash Berserker, which is an absolute powerhouse in Arena. Elusive Schemer, absolutely crazy. And if you're running an adequate number of items, cards like Thieves Guild Recruit, which is a 1/2 body, which isn't great for 2, but drawing a card and then equipping an item to it can generate a lot of advantage as well. 2-for-1 removal is kind of one that you need to work towards. There's not a lot of just obvious 2-for-1 removals, although you occasionally will blow people out with things like Immolating Blast, Dawn's Wrath, stuff like that. But I'm talking about specifically, actually, charge creatures that have big butts, or damage-based removal, like Firestorm in lanes where you have bigger butted creatures. Again, playing in number 1. If you can leverage spell... Oh, and the poster child for this, of course, is Spirit Knife, which costs 7, but is probably the best single-target removal in Arena available. But yeah, this is... the 2-for-1 removal thing isn't going to be easy to hit, but when you can hit it, it can turn the tide of games, which can be huge. And finally, we have cards that create multiple creatures. Unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, most of these are very conditional or relatively weak. Midnight Sweep is an example of a not unconditional one, but a very weak card in general. But things like Golden Saint can be an absolute blowout. Used correctly, like on a last gasp creature or on a creature you swung into already and has like 1 health left, the card that makes 2 3/3 guards in purple can be absolutely huge. Anything that produces multiple bodies. Even Crassius's Favor in the right circumstances can be huge, again, if you're running cards that support that particular card. The reason this is at the bottom here is, like I said, some of these are conditional, some of them are relatively weak, but in general, they are a great way to generate card advantage, which is a way to win the grindy game, which two equally paced decks might end up finding themselves in. Next, we have, naturally, tip number 4. Shout out Spirit Knife. Expensive cards that I would say cost 6 or more, need to either win you the game or turn the tide of a losing one. Either way, you don't want too many. One of the easiest ways to lose an Arena game is to not play anything on turns 2, 3, or 4. And really just 2 or 3. You're likely already out of it unless your opponent has an equally poor curve for their deck. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Cards whose power level is so high that they might win you the game, or they might turn the tide of a losing one. Dawn's Wrath, for instance, is a card that if you know you have it, you could win the game with an 8-drop card. Nahag Leave is an example of an incredibly high power level card. Spirit Knife is a card that's always great to have as one of, because it's the kind of card that if you're both top decking will put you at an advantage. But in the event that it's turn 3 and you draw a 6-drop into 7-drop into 12-drop, like, you're likely to lose the game. And 12 drops are of particular notice, right? Like Iron Atronach, for instance, is, in terms of raw power level, almost unparalleled. It also is the kind of card that's going to be exceptionally hard to remove in Arena. But if it sits in your hand for 12 turns while your opponent plays things and actually does things, then you might not ever be able to play it. There are a lot of incredibly powerful 12-drop cards that I might pass over for a relatively weaker, cheaper card that I know I'm going to be able to play, because so many games are going to end before you have the chance to do it. And if you're sitting there that whole game with a 12-drop in your hand, that's bad times. It's just not a great way to win the game. I'm not going to give like a firm limit to how many I think you should run, like I am with 2-drops, which I think are more important. Like, you have to have 2-drop creatures. But I do think that it's an easy trap to fall into to go for the highest power level card every time, when sometimes the Reflective Automaton, the 2/3 Dwemer God I was talking about, is the right pick. That's just how Arena works. The curve is more important than the content a lot of the time. I really should have written that on there because that sounds awesome. Alright, let's go to Arena tip number 5. Factotums are usually not worth it, except for the 3-cost guy. Specifically, the 3-cost guy that can be a 3/2 or a 1/2 with lethal. A 1/2 with lethal for 3 is not unreasonable, and a 3/2 for 3 is also not unreasonable. It's not great. It's still not great. But it's not nearly as bad as the rest of the Factotums are. Factotums are it's kind of a trap, right? It's a draft trap. Occasionally, you might end up with a deck with 7 Factotums in it, and you're going to crush it. Probably. But even then, I mean, not necessarily, right? Factotums are the kind of thing that maybe you want a couple to trigger your Fabricants, some of which are a very high power level. Shulk Fabricant, for instance, is one of my favorite cards in Arena. But for the most part, Factotums are just not worth it. Don't fall into the trap of, it's pick 3, here's a mediocre Factotum. The 5-cost one's one I think of immediately. If that's the only card you get, that's a card that you play on turn 5, has no impact on the board, and isn't even likely to trade with your opponent's earlier things in a very successful way. So just avoid Factotums for the most part. Arena tip number 6. Take the trade unless you see a win next turn or know you're going to lose the long game. Ways you might know you're going to lose the long game are, my opponent has a Bloodline Outcast on board. I have a Harpy in my hand and some creatures that I can play in one of the other lanes. If I put all my creatures into the lane with the Bloodline Outcast, I could 3-for-1 myself. That's probably not a good idea. However, if you can ever successfully make a trade, unless you're going to win the next turn or you know you're going to lose the long game, and by successfully make the trade, what I mean is come out ahead, generate card advantage perhaps, or just generate an advantageous board position than your opponent has, you should make that trade. This is, again, why I really value high-toughness creatures, warded creatures, stuff like that, because those are going to let you win the game. This is really an extension of card advantage theory. But a lot of the times, too, if you can clear the board with what you have by trading everything into what they have, and it's a roughly equal trade, and you and your opponent are on roughly equal standings in terms of cards in hand, maybe you should do that, and then you take control of the direction of that game by being the player with initiative. You play the first creature onto that newly empty board. That's something that's very powerful. And having initiative in this game is absolutely essential. The way that the Arena meta is right now, if you lose initiative, you're likely to lose the game unless you have one of those more expensive cards that is going to turn the tide of the game for you. So you definitely want to hold on to initiative if possible, and you do that by making successful trades and drafting a deck that's capable of doing that. Arena tip number 7. Mass removal is only good if you can use it asymmetrically. This is kind of an extension of the idea that some cards are of insanely high power level, but aren't good enough. Ice Storm, for instance, is a card that in some decks is going to be bad. Let's say your deck's real low to the ground. If all Ice Storm's going to do is kill the entire board, and your deck's full of cheap creatures, you're going to stifle your own initiative and your own success by playing Ice Storm. If your creatures survive an Ice Storm, or if you for some reason drafted a control deck in Arena, which is possible, it's just not... It's a lot harder to do than a mid-range or mid-grow deck. You want to be able to use your mass removal asymmetrically, because let's say you do play an Ice Storm and you wipe the board. Unless it's turn 12, what else are you going to do that turn? Likely nothing, or nothing of very big impact. And your opponent then will gain the initiative, play the cards out, and now you're back to reacting to what your opponent's doing. Mass removal is kind of a trap. So if you know that there's a way you can use it with the deck you have, or the specific cards you have, you can use it asymmetrically, awesome. That's a good way to just blow people out and win the game. If not, avoid it. Arena tip number 8. Early drain creatures can be a trap. Sometimes you want to lose a rune or two. A great example of this is the 2/2 yellow creature, Vivexity Pilgrim, I believe, that has Drain and has Exalt and can become a 4/4. It's one of the worst things you can do on turn 2, not just because it's a 2/2, although that's part of the reason it's so terrible, but also because there's some reasonable reasons to want to have some of your first 2 runes broken. You generate card advantage in a sense that way, and if you built a deck that can retake the board, or never lost initiative, but your opponent went to the shadow lane and is beating you down, cool, you now have more resources to work with. And by the way, an extension of this is immediately moving to the shadow lane is also a poor idea. You want to start off in the field lane almost all the time. There are, of course, exceptions. Let's say your opponent puts a creature into the field lane turn 1, and you have a creature with Rally, so you drop it into the shadow lane because you don't want to just lose it for no advantage. And you have a way to retake the field lane on turn 3. Maybe that's a reason to start in the shadow lane. But you don't want to be gaining life early in the game. Really, life gain is kind of a double-edged sword in general. There are some cards, like Bloodline Outcast, which are exceptionally strong, and if you have them in your deck, you can play differently kind of the entire game. But for the most part, as powerful a card as Barrowstalker is, I mean, very constructed playable card, it's not always the best turn to play, although as a 2/3 guard, it might sometimes be the best play. But just bear that in mind. All other things being equal, you don't want to drop that Drain creature that early. Alright, let's go to Arena tip number 9. Be aggressive. There's much less in Arena to punish you than there is in Constructed. You can play around Prophecies if it's, if the game is neck and neck. If you might just lose to a Prophecy, then by all means take that into consideration. But for the most part, there is almost nothing that's going to punish you in Arena for being really aggressive. Not nearly to the degree that there is in Constructed, right? Because your opponent's deck is just as much of a pile as yours, more than likely. So by giving them more random sort of synergistic cards, if they're lucky sort of synergistic cards, you're not really any more likely to lose than if they have just like 1 or 2 cards. Now, this is not always the case. Come on, Celine. I know you love Arena, but that's not always the case. Obviously, you need to play every situation by ear, but as a general rule, you want the ring. I know you can't do anything to get it, but you want it. And you want to be the one with the initiative. This is the aggressive part. You want to be in control of the direction of the game, and your opponent needs to be in a position where they're reacting to what you're doing. There are niches, like, if you can't handle a Prophecy, don't swing for 1 when your opponent's at 26. Maybe. But sometimes it's right, because sometimes those little bits of damage matter. That is Arena tip number 9. Let's go to the one I think everybody probably wants to see. This is my Arena class hierarchy. This is tip number 10. You may notice a trend here. Number 1 pick, House Redoran. I think it is significantly stronger than all of the other classes. If you can pick Redoran, pick it. Rally's a crazy keyword. There are some amazing 2-drops in these colors. And it has good options across the spectrum. Some of the best removal in the game, although it doesn't have Spirit Knife, is worth pointing out. If you're interested in something a little more mid-rangey and a little less all-in, because Redoran is the kind of deck you can play a slower version of, but it doesn't have access to the kind of tools other colors might have. Play House Dagoth, my second best pick. Shout out to Hand of Dagoth for being the best tricolor card you're likely to get in Arena. That card is absolutely bonkers. I mean, that you want to talk about card advantage. That's a creature your opponent is likely to have to 3-for-1 themselves against in order to get off the board. And as a 5-strength drain creature, they're going to have to get it off the board. Next we have Halalu. Plot is a particularly powerful keyword. Some of the most powerful cards in Arena right now, most powerful commons and rares, have Plot. But again, you're looking at some rally colors. You're looking at cards that work really well together to be aggressive and snowbally. Snowball meaning you have a small snowball at the top of a hill, you drop it down a snowy hill, it picks up more and more snow until there's an avalanche, right? That is the sort of thing that Halalu, Redoran, and Dagoth, although Redoran and Halalu more than Dagoth, can all do. Next is Warrior, Archer, and Crusader. These are 2-color versions of the 3 decks above, for the most part. And that is because, frankly, picking a 3-color option has no disadvantages in Arena. You're just as likely to be presented with 3 bad cards in a house as you are in a class. You have access to synergies that don't exist in 2-color classes in a 3-color class. You have access to Hand of Dagoth in Dagoth. And you just have more flexibility in the types of cards presented to you. So if, hey, I'm really in need for this type of card, for a guard with this sort of stat line or this kind of cost, you're more likely to be presented with that sort of thing if you have access to more colors that have more diverse array of keywords and abilities and stat lines and stuff like that. At number 7, we have all the stuff without red in it, except for Battle Mage, which is number 8. Battle Mage is the worst class in Arena. I think it always has been, frankly. It's totally possible to draft a really aggressive Arena Battle Mage deck and just win, but you have access to virtually no comeback tools in Arena with Battle Mage. Every Battle Mage Arena deck you're going to draft is going to look something like the worst draw that Giants Battle Mage and Constructed has ever seen times 1,000. There's no drain. There are poor guards. There is not great removal options. There's some good card draw, there's some good reach, there's some good stuff like that. but you're so all in with Battle Mage. I mean, I cannot in good faith recommend ever drafting Battle Mage in Arena if you have any other options. So that's my Arena tier hierarchy list. I have one more tip because I came up with an 11th one and I didn't want to remake these because paint's a fickle mistress. Tip 11. Any card that fits into the previous categories that can also serve as reach to close out a game is awesome. Okay, so if a card can generate card advantage or is removal or is a 2/3 guard and it has charge or it has a last gasp that deals damage to your opponent or anything like that, or Satanid Courier, a 3/1 for 2. Not a great stat line, but it serves as reach, so it deserves additional consideration. Anything that can change combat math for your opponent, surprise your opponent, something your opponent can't expect because they don't see it on board, deserves a step up in whatever ranking and previous category or tip that something appeared in. So yeah, that's it. Arena is awesome. Arena is my favorite way to play this game. Solo and versus, I think, are both excellent. I think playing Arena makes you a better player in general. I think it makes you a much better deck builder because you're exposed to cards you might never have considered before, and it makes you more creative because you realize that some things that you never see anyone play might have unexpected potential. You might be the guy because you play, or woman, who played an Arena game with a card that you never seen anyone play, that found some interaction, some niche application that you can then take onto the ladder and change everyone's mind about the card. That's the great thing about Arena. Arena is also great to build collections and test your own skill. It's just a great mode of playing this game. I'm super excited about Arena. I love Arena. Doing Arena Week has been a real blast for me. And I'm glad to see that the response has been pretty good. But look, those are my Arena tips. I think that I got good at this game because I play. I mean, and look, all jokes aside, like I'm not terrible at this game, and I think a lot of that comes from playing a lot of Arena. I think if you follow these tips, you will be a better Arena player than you would be if you didn't. So, all right, see you all on Arena, guys.